Good morning, boys and girls. Mr. Reed here, finishing up our story about Ralph Bunche. When we left off last, he got accepted to UCLA for college and received a scholarship for it. And his grandma talked to him that he should go. And I said, what do you think is going to happen to Ralph? So today we're going to find out the rest of that story as we continue to talk about responsibility. Hopefully you are being responsible at home. Why he went to college, of course. He worked so hard. He studied so well that when he graduated, he was given a degree, summa cum laude. That's a big word. That sounds mighty important word, said Ump. What do they mean? They mean with highest praise, said Ralph. They mean I have the highest honors anyone can have when he graduates from college. And your grandma's going to be so proud she could bust, said Ump. Just wait till she hears you got a fellowship and that you're going to Harvard University. I knew you'd be something special, said Grandma when Ralph told her the news. Then one night, not long after, Grandma died quietly in her sleep. Ralph felt a terrible sadness. Don't worry, said Ump. You made her very happy. Now go on and do your best. She would want that. All the dreams she had were for you. And there he is in his graduation, Ump on his shoulder. So Ralph went to Harvard, and there, for the first time, he met other educated black people. Most of them were students, and they were just as poor as Ralph, but they all had great plans for the future. They met in the evenings when the classes were over and their work was done. They talked a lot about what it was like to be black in America. Often, the talks grew excited. Some evenings, there were arguments, and they almost turned into fights. Hey, cried Ump. We really don't need an umpire. Better do something, Ralph, before someone gets hurt. Ralph would jump into the argument because he always knew what he was talking about. He didn't make any hasty or irresponsible remarks, so others always calmed down and listened to him. Let's see, they were getting a little bit excited. When Ralph finished his studies at Harvard, he accepted a teaching job at Howard University in Washington, D.C. This was one of the most famous black schools in the country, and Ralph's classes were filled with bright, ambitious young black people. Ralph was a good teacher, and he always had exciting things to talk about, so he was very popular. But he wasn't an easy teacher. He demanded that all students do their best. Sounds like being a bobcat. That has something to do with responsibility, doesn't it? Asked Ump when Ralph was marking papers one evening. It has everything to do with responsibility, declared Ralph. If I do my best for the students, but don't make sure they do their best too, then I haven't really accomplished anything. It isn't good for me and it isn't good for them. Ralph got a faraway look in the eye just then. You're thinking of something nice, aren't you? Said Ump. And he was. He was thinking of Ruth Harris, a young lady who was one of his students. Don't you think Ruth Harris is brighter than most of the class? He asked Ump. I certainly do, said Ump. Prettier, too, or hadn't you noticed? But of course Ralph noticed. The next day he and Ruth discussed the report with him. He talked and she listened, and she talked and he listened. They met again and again, and before you know it, they were engaged. Ralph had a job at Howard, but he didn't have much money. He had to work and scrimp and save until he had $150 for the honeymoon. Then he and Ralph were married. Just a year later, Ralph had a chance to go to Europe and Africa to study the problems of the people there. It was a great opportunity, Ralph told Ruth, but I don't think I can go. I don't want to leave you alone. Ralph, I knew when I married you that you would be an important man, said Ruth. I know we'll have to be apart a lot. It's all right. You go on and do your studies. You sure married a nice lady, said Ump. I sure did, agreed Ralph, and he began his travels. In the years after his marriage, he went all over the world and studied the things that created differences and problems between people. He went back to Harvard to study too, and he became the first black American to get a doctor's degree in political science. His life was full and happy, and yet he was never too busy to dream. What we really need, he said to Ump, is a place where people from every nation in the world can meet and talk, a place where they can discuss ways to settle their differences. There's some of the places he traveled. In 1941, the United States entered the Second World War, and Ralph became an advisor to the government. Then in 1943, he became the first black to be named to a division head in the Department of State. You're showing them something, said Ump. You're showing them that a black man can be responsible as anyone else. Lots of people don't realize that. Then they'll find out, said Ralph quietly. Ralph Bunche was certainly not famous when the war ended in 1945, but he was known among people in the government. They knew that he was brilliant. They knew that he had prepared himself and found out about things and understood what was going on. In short, they knew he was responsible and that he could make other people be responsible too. Because he was known for these qualities, Ralph was asked to draw up the charter for the United Nations. "This is terrific," cried Ralph. "It's my dream coming true. At last, we'll have a place where people from all nations can meet to talk about and overcome their problems." "It's about time," declared Ump. For a time, it looked as if the United Nations might not work out. In 1947, when the international organization was still new, a war started in Palestine because of disagreements over the new nation of Israel. Trevally, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he called Ralph. "You're a diplomat. You're diplomatic," he told Ralph. "You talk gently, but when you talk, people listen. You can make people behave responsibly. Can you try to get the Arabs and Jews to stop fighting and sign a peace treaty?" "This is going to be a tough one," said Ump. "The Arabs and the Jews do not like each other very much. You'll have a very hard time getting them to agree." "I have to try," said Ralph, and he packed his suitcase. "If the UN fails to make peace this time, it may never be able to function again as a peacemaking agency." The meetings between the Arabs and Jews were held in a neutral territory, in the island of Rhodes in Greece. Ralph worked long hours. He pleaded with both sides to make peace. Sometimes he was angry. Often he was tired. He missed Ruth and he wanted to be home. But he wouldn't give up. "You're some umpire," said Ump. "I hope so," declared Ralph. Then he called the delegates together for one final meeting. It was a meeting that lasted all day and all night. Everyone was exhausted, but Ralph wouldn't let anyone leave. He kept the men talking, and because they knew him and trusted him, and because he was responsible, he was able to make them responsible too. At last, as the sun rose over Rhodes, the treaty was signed. Ralph Bunche had ended the war in Palestine, and the United Nations was able to keep peace. When Ralph went home from Rhodes, crowds of people met him at the airport. There was a ticker-tape parade through Manhattan and the visit with the President Truman in the White House. There was even a trip to Los Angeles where people turned out by the thousands for Ralph Bunche Day. Then Ralph was told that he would be given one of the greatest honors in the world, the Nobel Peace Prize. "Wouldn't Grandma be proud of you?" said Ump. Ralph knew she would have been, and the thought made him happy. He was even happier now that he had been responsible. He had helped bring peace to Palestine, and so he had helped save the United Nations. He had seen what needed to be done and had taken care of it. When you see something that needs to be done, do you take care of it? If you do, you're responsible. And people are responsible to you, too. And chances are that this might make you happier. And there's Ralph at the parade. Just like our friend, Ralph Bunche. I hope you enjoyed our book on responsibility. Continue to be responsible at home as we work on schoolwork and things around the house with your parents. Hopefully they will be filling out some Bobcat Brags. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll be back with another book in the near future.